Ismat Chugtai, Caravan Dust. Part 1. I was sobbing profusely. A heartless brute was beating a hapless dark child. I was too small to know who either he or the child were, or why he was beating the child. The terrifying sound of the fat cane crackling down on the bones of the beaten is vividly alive even today, and I hear it often. The realization dawned on me then that the older will always beat the younger, that the strong always batter the weak. In my mind, the strong stood tall, with the weak strewn like dirt under their feet. My head bowed in obeisance to the strong, and I began despising the weak. Even so, there was something that lay hidden in the furthest reaches of my being, of which I was hardly aware. Whenever I saw a grand palace eaten up by a moss and overgrown with grass, I smiled secretly in my heart of hearts. The might of the humble grass awed my consciousness. We were so many children that my mother was repelled at the very sight of us. We had rushed into this world, one after the other, trampling and crushing her womb. Having had to endure the associated nausea and pain of gestation, she gave us little more importance than the accorded to a punishment. Even at a young age, she had bloated to abominable proportions. At 35, she was already a nanny, moving from one punishment to another. We grew up in the care of servants and were very close to them. Servants have two faces, one that they present to their masters, kissing their hands and feet, and other that they don behind them, full of curses and abuse. There is no more unfortunate class than that of the domestic servant, especially in India, where unemployment and poverty have kept a large number of subservient to a restricted class. We had a few servants who had been in the service of our family for generations. The minds of these servile menials were as slavish as their bodies. If they were kicked out, they would knock about futilely till they returned to be tethered to the same nail, like pet dogs. These days, with all the progress of the country has made, and some amelioration of the unemployment problem, servants with this kind of slave mentality are not so common. As a child, I saw minions in such pitiable state that I began hating both the master and the institution of servants. Many of my stories have characters that are servants, some weak and helpless, some liars, some cheats, connivers. In my limited world, class distinctions were clear in the relationship between flunky and master. This affected me greatly. When I came into contact with the world at large, I learned that discrimination on the basis of class and caste are merely a farce. The real issue with the distinction between the rich and the poor, this was the way of life. However God-fearing and nationalistic the rich, they treated the poor as if they were their servants. There was no room for love and affection in our upbringing, and it was only what we learned from our servants that came to our rescue. It was at a condolence meeting on the occasion of Muharram that I first understood the meaning of Marshia and Nauha, and what the bit about the arrow being lodged into the throat of Ali Ashkar came up. I was aghast. I started shrieking loudly. The mourning women fell silent and looked at me in amazement. Perhaps they thought that the long wait for the tabarruk had made me unbearably hungry, or perhaps that it was hurt or an insect had bitten me. Why was it shot? The arrow in the throat, why was it shot? I agitated as I was wont not to. No one answered my question. Dismissed as hysterical, I was shunted out of the gathering. When we returned home, my brothers immediately reported that I had created a furor at the assembly, that misbehaved thoroughly, and had made them hang their heads in shame. In short, I had been driven out in absolute ignominy. Why was the arrow shot? It could have been shot in the hand. Why was it shot in the poor chap's throat? I asked obstinately. That's enough. Now shut up and go off to sleep, I was admonished. But my share of sleep did not come. As soon as I would close my eyes, I'd see the arrow pierced in the mouth of the child. Go to sleep, you witch, or I'll strangle you. The adults took turns threatening to kill me, but my sobs did not stop. Then I went to Shekani Bua because I was afraid of being alone in my bed. Why was the arrow shot? I asked Shekani Bua amidst sobs. He was a thorough bastard, she explained. Then why was the child taken to him? The child was thirsty. Then he should have been given milk, but the mother's milk had run dry. Then he could have been given water. Where was the water? His army was guarding the canal. Why? Now how would I know that? There must have been something wrong. So, the child was taken to the canal to drink water, and so the arrow was shot. In the throat? Yes. At this huge thorny ball started getting stuck in my throat again. Arrows this and arrows that. Will not sleep herself, nor will let anyone else sleep. My mother slapped me so hard I almost collapsed. For years afterwards, this incident was a family joke. Whenever a guest visited our house, my brothers would say, during Muharram, she cried loudly in public, then Amma gave her a good beating. And I would sink my head in shame. This was the first important lesson of my life, and its effects on me lingered for years. I would die at the thought of going for a meeting. The arrow in the boy's neck would raise its ugly head again, and the thorny ball would stick in my throat. The sanctity of the Majlis was lost. A few years ago, I saw a film on Hitler and his misdemeanors. Seeing the lakhs of roti corpses, the arrows stuck in Ali Asghar's throat started prickling my conscience again. For 12 years, a bloody Holi had been played in Vietnam. Where is everyone? Why doesn't anyone stop it? How long will humanity helplessly watch this spectacle? On the face of it, man has stopped eating the meat of man, but he continues to savor the extract of his flesh and to digest it. I do not love such a world. I detest the principles of such a world. Ismat Chugtai, Caravan Dust, Part 2. I remember another instance from my childhood that has a tremendous impact on me. My father was a progressive man who maintained cordial relations with quite a few Hindus. Hindus and Muslims of a particular class lived in close proximity and shared a genial relationship. Yet, we realized that there was something inherently different between a Hindu and a Muslim. Right from our childhood, we were conscious that the verbal avowals of brotherhood went hand in hand with a certain constraint. If a Hindu were to come home for a meal, then the mention of the word meat was taboo. While eating at the same table, one had to be careful that one did not touch any of their things. The servants laid the meal, but our neighbor's cook served their food. Even the utensils were borrowed from there. It was suffocating. On the one hand, placing the blame squarely on the British, people talked fervently about the progressive ideas and swapped avowals of love and sacrifice. On the other, the adults trembled for fear their chaffing children would break the rules and transgress the religious code. As children, we often took turns biting into the same fruit, unobserved by adults. Sushi would eat at our home quite often, and we would share fruits, snacks, and biscuits because this could not be contaminated. But knowing that Sushi was a vegetarian made us think to trick her into eating meat. This gave us real happiness. Normally, we were perennially ensconced in either one of our homes, but on Bakra Eid, Sushi would be locked up and debarred from our house. Once, The charm of the Jamashadni celebrations in our Hindu neighborhood's house lured me into the sanctorum, where the handsome child sat bedecked on a silver swing. I touched his cheek and instantly picked him up. The child cried out and fell down. I was thrown out like a dead lizard, and a complaint was immediately registered with my parents. My faults gave me a sound beating, and I was made to understand that idol worship was a sin. The supremacy of Islam was drummed into my head with a view to improving my lot in the afterlife. My father was a liberal man who, on principle, looked after the rights of girls more than those of boys. But the situation was the same as in the brotherhood of Hindus and Muslims. Girls and boys are equal. These were simply a few whitewashing slogans that needed to be aired. My three sisters had already married off before I grew up. Even so, being the only girl amongst many boys, I seldom lost out. Whenever I felt that my rights had been infringed, I presented my case in my grandfather's court for adjudication. My sisters were very competent. Apart from Urdu, Persian, and the Quran Sharif, they were well instructed in embroidery, stitching, knitting, and cooking. In contrast, I was a total good for nothing. I was neither in the habit of stifling my desires, nor had I any interest in such activities. So I aped the boys and learned to climb trees and to race on the bicycle everywhere. But at each step, I was made to bite the dust. Compared to my brothers, I was an absolute straggler. Why should they feel any pity for me? Under the protective care of my father, I was bent on becoming their equal. For instance, each of my brothers took turns riding our horse, but as soon as I sat on it, they would start grumbling. When I played gilli danda, I would lose miserably. If I insisted on playing football, I got kicked in the face. My brothers always complained about my stubbornness. Before their marriage, my elder sisters used to rule the roost. They had the keys to the godown in their custody. That is how my brothers remained under their control. I was only a headache for them. My elder brother, Azim Bek Chugtai, had a weak constitution and was therefore unable to take part in any vigorous physical activity, and was not able to do so being a girl. And I was not able to do so being a girl. He took pity on me. He told me that the boys were bulls. Why should you become one? Compete with them in studies. That is where you will defeat them. He was a year and a half older than me, but 3 classes ahead. Painstakingly, he started coaching me, and then it happened that I got to 2 double promotions. As for my older brother, he failed once. And so one day we were in the same class, and I started helping him with his homework, and suddenly I knew I had become better than him. Prompted by Azim Bek Chugtai, I read translations of the Quran, the newspapers, and Muslim history. Sitting amongst Abba's friends, I aired my newfound knowledge. My mother was taken aback, and her impulse was to punish me. However, encouraged by my grandfather, I learned a great deal in their company. My mother could not brook these actions of mine. She claimed that she was very apprehensive about my future. These masculine pursuits did not behove a girl at all. She did not understand these things in depth. But I soon learned when my mother was scared. I soon learned why my mother was scared. It was a man's world, she said, made and marred by man. Woman is just a part of this world. The means for the expression of his love or hate. He either worships her or rejects her according to his mood. Women have to resort to feminine wills to achieve their goals: patience, cleverness, intelligence, and the ability to make man dependent on her. For this, she had to be coy while fixing buttons, to dye making rotis, to do with her own hands those trivial facile jobs that could quite easily be done by servants, and to make his excesses with bowed head so that he would be ultimately shamed into falling at her feet. But I had spent my life in the company of my brothers. I had competed with them, and I had sworn to do one better than them. To me, this femininity seemed just a hoax. To my mind, this display of contentedness, cowardice, and hypocrisy was deceitful. To me, even makeup, dressing up, and wearing gaudy clothes seemed to be the means of covering up faults and engaging in deception. No male will fall for such a girl, my sensible friends warned me. Meekly, I tried to understand their point of view, and my brothers got after me. There was nothing to stop them from saying whatever they wanted to. If I was frank, they were even more so. They hounded me, accused me of angling for the attention of boys. How could I even dream of wearing any makeup? And I learned from experience that this was not at all necessary to apply heavy makeup. Even without it, I have never lacked friends. In fact, many of my friendships often bordered on love. In Russia, I met some girls who did not believe in this artificially at all and wore simple workman clothes. I asked them why they did not use beauty embellishments. Never felt the need. Why? Do I look bad? No, but you could look even more beautiful. I believe in presenting my real face, my own covering, my own lips. My femininity is enough, she replied with great conviction. The youth of Europe, too, is bored with this artificiality. It is enough that the man can be man and the woman a woman, to maintain a frank relationship with them. I was greatly impressed by the Russian girls. In my stories, I have always decried the economic dependency and helplessness of women. If a girl listens to the men in her family only because she is financially dependent on them, it is not obedience, but rather a deception. If a wife sticks to her husband simply because he supplies the bread and butter, she is as helpless as a prostitute. Only weak and subservient children will be born of the womb of such a woman. Such people will always be subservient to those from developed nations. As long as the women in this nation remain helpless and continue to accept the maltreatment from men, we will remain victims of an inferiority complex, both economically and politically. Rashid Jihan influenced me. I tried to learn the candor and self-reliance from her. Ismat Chugtai, Caravan Dust, Part 3. As a child, I had a very dear friend, Mangu, the daughter of our coachman. She was a little older than me and used to throw her weight around. She was married at the age of 13 or 14 and went away to Lucknow. When she came back with her first daughter, she was very subdued. All her playfulness had vanished and her smile had disappeared. She used to be beaten black and blue by both her mother-in-law and her husband for the crime of having given birth to a daughter. When she brought her third daughter, my Abba had returned to Agra on his retirement. I was experiencing the helplessness of women in the stifling atmosphere of Agra. The women of the neighborhood were all consumptives, withered and troubled by their husbands, mothers-in-law and sisters-in-law. However, bolstered by talismans and voodoo, they stuck on. I had begun to hate my womanhood even more. Mangu also seemed to be suffering from tuberculosis. Her mother-in-law was planning to bring in another daughter-in-law who would give birth to a son. Mangu's parents were wailing, trembling at the thought of having to take on the burden of Mangu and her 3 daughters. Mangu's wailing daughters were an open advertisement of the insignificance of womankind. I was angered at the injustice of God who had made me a girl, and I whimpered and prayed for the boon of somehow becoming a boy. Abba, through the superintendent of police in Lucknow, put pressure on Mangu's husband to call her back and threatened that if he got another wife, he would put him behind bars. When she returned the next time, Mangu was unrecognizable. She had started looking hale and hearty. We were told that she was under the influence of a demon which would enter her body and beat up her mother-in-law. It even bit into her husband's shin once. When they called for an exorcist, he said that it was actually the mother-in-law who had a curse. If she continued to live with her daughter-in-law, the latter would give birth to 7 daughters. Mangu's husband moved with his wife to a new job in Daliganj. It was then that I realized that even if Mangu was illiterate and uneducated, she hardly was a fool. With her limited capabilities, she did whatever she could, showing that women could be weak but not necessarily brainless. Some of the sense of inferiority of women was mitigated from my mind. It was not necessary to be a boy. It was essential to have the brains of one. It was then that I shelved things like needlework and started studying seriously. Part 4. Our family was progressive, but this attitude was acceptable only for boys. I was, after all, just a girl. Every woman in the family, mother, aunt, sister, was terrorized. Society had fixed a station for her. If she overstepped these limits, she would have to pay the price. Too much education was dangerous. In our home, there was no restriction on speech and deed, but this standard was only applicable to men. When I exercised the same liberty, I would be scolded. For some reason, Azim Bai encouraged and instigated me. He had moved on from dry and serious writing to writing stories. What he had not been able to do through his serious compositions, he managed to accomplish through his short stories. His heroine was an extremely mischievous and interesting individual. From him, I learned that if one had a point to make, wrapping it up in stories would attract less flack. More people would read them, and they were more effective. I had written many articles to which no one had paid any attention, but as soon as I wrote 2 or 3 stories, a give and take with the readers began. In addition, I was on the telephone. As on the telephone, anything could be said in stories, and no hand could reach for my cheeks with a slap. Earlier, I had no clue about the response of my readers. I used to write only in the Saki, and they threw away all the letters they got in my name. Unfortunately, all their correspondence relating to the first story published soon after my marriage, Lihaf, was handed over to me because Shahid Ahmed Shahab now considered me responsible enough. The tenor of these letters was so terrifying that initially I broke into a sweat. Chastened, I pulled the reins of my pen, and to my knowledge have never loosened them again. But woe to that environment in which I grew up. I have not been able to break the habit of saying things uninhibitedly, and if people react and abuse me, I never take it personally. I got used to taking a lot of flack without allowing it to breed hatred, and can still sit down amicably with my detractors. Ismat Chugtai, Caravan Dust. Part 5. In my life, books have had the greatest influence on me. I have received something or the other from every book. I looked for solutions to many of my problems through them, and most often found my answers there. Books turned out to be my dearest friends and proved to be a relief in sorrow. Thousands of disappointments, countless dark moments were made more bearable thanks to these friends. I have felt kinship with the author of every book. Now, whose names should I read out? Starting with Hardy and the Bronte sisters, I arrived at George Bernard Shaw. But the books by Russian literatures had the greatest influence because I encountered them when I was looking around for a guiding spirit. Not finding answers in dry political philosophy, I fed on Russian literature. Even today, I read Chekhov for the blessing of a lesson well learned. When I cannot come to grips with some story that I am writing, when I do not know where to start and where to end, Then I read a few stories of Chekhov for some mental exercise. Immediately my wits sharpen and my pen starts moving. I turn to the subject of talking after the one of my readings. My family is a very talkative one. All sense of time is lost when 2 or 3 members get together. I enjoy talking to everyone: shopkeepers, grocers, taxi drivers, even beggars. Teasing old men and women, listening to their curses and abuses, gives me a strange kind of pleasure. It is not necessary that the person be highly educated. Sometimes, talking to uneducated and simple people can open the windows of the mind. To understand a person, it is absolutely necessary to speak with him. Now, I am so practiced in the art of talking that I can extract the story of their life in 5 minutes. I only need to ask a few straightforward, small questions and I have all the information I want. Talking is an interesting activity. I have talked with Safiya Young Nizar more than I have done with anyone else over the years. Speaking to Manto sharpened the sensibility. One could continue to speak with him for 6 to 7 hours. His wife, Safiya, was a talkative person too. One could simply chat with Sultana Jaffrey. One could exchange repartee and have a lowbrow discussion with Ali Sardaf Jaffrey. Those who have experienced the bitter, sour bite of his speech also know that he is capable of an equal measure of tenderness and sweetness. If he sought to sing, he could also burn to ashes. There was a time when, having earmarked his prey, he would rest only after reducing his victim to tears. One could never talk enough to Kuzdia Saidi. Talking to Salma Sadique meant taking a whiff of fragrance. Annie takes the cake though. She speaks so fast as if time is running out and she has so much to say. But as far as talkativeness goes, there is no one to beat my maternal cousins, Akhtar and Jamila. Compared to them, normal people seem dumb. After talking for hours with them, my tongue feels raw, shorn of its color. Sentences slip off their lips on their own, broken, unfinished sentence, but full of meaning. Thanks to their maternal lineage, there is a particular sweet diliwala slant in their speech. And now, my thoughts on writing. Persian is considered to be our mother tongue. My father's elder brother was a lone soldier in the battle for supporting the language. He did not educate his sons in English. He could speak, read, and write Persian with great fluency, but could never get a job. He died in penury, but still insisted that his nephews be taught Persian. Our father, who would normally listen to him, put his foot down. Okay, not the boys, but the girls at least could be taught Persian. No harm in that. I was talking of a time when my sisters, having learned Persian, had been married off. Poor me, I was the one left to be the guinea pig. This my brothers took as further proof of their superiority over me and teased me mercilessly about it. I began to hate Persian. But my great uncle had nothing else to do but teach me Persian and read the namaz. I wept as I crammed. I rebelled against it as soon as I was able to. Much later, when I had studied enough of the language, I used to feel a thrill of familiarity whenever I chanced upon an ancient or modern Persian literary text. But by then, my great uncle was dead, and I could not even thank him. Even so, I was never at complete ease with the language. Secondly, the language spoken at home was so nimble that I never had to stop to think. Man can express every thought in the language of everyday use. At that time, my language was closer to Hindi, because the latter had not yet become dense. I was mellifluous and sweet-tongued, which now only lives on the lips of the women of Delhi and Agra. I have always enjoyed writing as much as reading. My writing has helped me endure the most interesting and difficult moments, helping to get rid of many burdens, and of shrugging off many others. This pen has been both the means of my livelihood and a veritable friend in lone moments. I can call anyone I want on this Udakotala, and when he comes, I can say anything to him, make him cry or laugh or reduce him to ashes. If I so want, I can tear him to pieces and destroy him completely. As with a puppet, I can make him dance to my tune. At such a time I feel some of the power of the Creator. Almost everybody with whom I had any interaction has left this imprint on my mind. After Azimbai, my friends, teachers, and even people whom I met in passing, Dr. Ashraf sorted out many of my problems. Whenever I met Fazlur Riham, Pro-Vice Chancellor, Aligarh Muslim University, I use him as a dictionary. Mention any drama or poem and he just launches into a recitation. Without knowing, he has taught me a great deal. As for Shahid Latif, apart from the fact that he was my husband, I shared another relationship with him, that of a friend. When he got into the mood of friendship, we became really thick. Though marriage is supposed to toll the death knell of friendship, ours survived with tremendous stubbornness. He used to revise all my stories and novels. Though I never told him, I really valued his opinion very much. If he ever found fault, he would throw his weight around. Part 6. Our family Dobi in Algira Natharaman is a special friend. He used to come personally to collect the clothes and sit on his haunches and chat for hours. I have heard stories from him, which are not available in books. Mostly he would sing his stories in his aging, trembling voice. He would strike a beat on the door frame with his silver ring and clad finger. For a 5 rupee fee and a rupee as a travel expense, he would engage us with his narration for 4 to 5 hours. If asked, he would even explain the Braj Bhasha. I learned the language of his class from him. In college, I learned about various religions from Dr. Tucker's lectures, and under his guidance, I read quite a bit. Many cobwebs regarding religion were dusted away from my mind. I was thoroughly impressed by Buddhism. I had reached the stage where I had broken all bonds and had come to regard humanity as the sole God. When I was invited for my childhood's neighbor Sushi's wedding, I was a little surprised that a narrow-minded hardcore Hindu still maintained social relations with my brother. I was reluctant to go. Sushi was a fraud who had agreed to marriage with whoever her parents had chosen for her. I had not forgotten the Jamashtami when I had been kicked out unceremoniously from her house for being a Muslim. When I reached her place, she was quick to gauge my reservations and smilingly offered me a laddu. I thought I'd take one and later throw it away. But instead of letting me pick one up, she pushed it to my mouth, of which I had to take a nibble. Thereupon she put the remainder into her mouth, making it clear that she too had not forgotten that earlier incident. When the walls caved in and opened out their arms, on my way out, she presented me with a small brass statue of Krishna. This set me thinking. I am a Muslim. Idol worship is a sin. But Puranic mythology is part of my national legacy. Aeons of cultures and philosophies are saturated in it. Religion and the culture of a nation are two different things. Here, I have an equal share just as I have in its soil, its sunlight, its water. If I play with color during Holi and light lamps during Diwali, does my religious belief take a beating? Is my belief and consciousness so weak, so incomplete, that it can be reduced to pieces? Everything that one sees and hears leaves a mark on the mind. All these marks join together to take the shape of a world which later build up to an edifice. Sometimes the marks leave a wound instead of a pearl. Wound on wound do not make a word, only lead to a vacuum. Whenever I hear a Hindu-Muslim riot from any part of the country, my pen turns around to nag me, and the shared laddu with sushi becomes a poisonous thorny ball in my throat, threatening to explode. Then I ask the Balkrishan lodged in my cupboard, Are you just a flight of the imagination? A dream of the flighty poet? Did you not take birth in the land in which I was born? Your truth is not no more than an airy superstition and desire. Can you not put all out the arrow struck in the heart of the earth? But the brass god cannot even laugh at my folly, for he has been petrified in metal. In this politicking world where God is the most profitable occupation, the inky stains of defeat are washed into the blood of innocence. Men fight like dogs to prove the worthlessness of one another. Will God break the metal teeth and come out one day? Translated by Menakshi Bharat.